Hello, friends, and welcome back to Staying in My Lane podcast. As I say pretty much every episode, you can find this podcast on Apple, Amazon, Spotify, RSS, iHeartRadio, pretty much anywhere, YouTube. So go share it with a friend, share it on your Facebook, share it with your family, whoever you want to share it with, because today's episode, it's a hard conversation, but it's one that we need to have. We're going to talk about something that affects every family, every community, and ultimately our society as a whole. What our kids are being exposed to, what they're growing up around, and how fast childhood is slipping away from our children. We're going to dive into kids' behavior, the culture of that behavior, functional medicine benefits, and the healthcare system, and societal issues that really affect every single person and how we can change that. Because there is a silent impact on a lot of things that affect children in today's world. And so I feel like we should talk about it. And I feel that oftentimes the functional side, holistic side, crunchy mom side of society is often looked down upon when we should actually be doing the research and digging deep into how we can heal our children instead of just masking their symptoms or basically putting a band-aid on a bullet wound. So if you're here for this conversation, because you're into the same things as I am. Maybe you're here to be more educated or just listen for an opinion, or maybe you completely disagree with me and think I'm crazy. Whatever the reason may be, come and listen and let's get started. This will be part 1 of 3. And before we get started, I just want to say this conversation is an opinion, and it does come with research-based evidence and education that I've dug really deep into. So it's not just some mumbo jumbo, crunchy mom bullshit, as people like to say. And while I know not everybody's going to agree with me, we need to be having these conversations because our world is just full of so many toxic things, from toxic foods to toxic screens to toxic people. It's something that we need to normalize healing ourselves naturally, normalize changing the way we deal with our children. We've talked about generational trauma. All of the topics that we've talked about come back to this, and it really does hit the nail on the head on how we, as a society and as a culture, live our lives and how it affects our children. So let's get started. In this part of the episode, we are going to dive into 3 major areas. And before we get started, I want to add a trigger warning and emphasis on the fact that we are going to talk about the impact of drugs in the home, exposure to sexual content too early, and the growing normalization of violence. First, we are going to skim over these topics and we'll dive deeper into them later. But I'm sure that we can all think of somebody who we know or we're associated with or we've heard about who is a parent who uses drugs while raising children. And obviously, that damage goes far beyond what we can see on the surface level. First, there's the emotional neglect. Kids crave stability. I've said that before. They crave attention and they crave love. But when substances take priority, even alcohol, children feel invisible. They may begin to believe that they're not important or worthy of care. Second, there's modeling behavior. I think this is really important. Kids learn by watching, not by what we say. For example, if they see a parent turning to drugs to cope with stress or pain, that becomes their blueprint for dealing with their own life. And if the environment itself becomes unsafe, there's a possibility of accidents, exposure to dangerous drug paraphernalia, or even encounters with people brought into the home through that drug culture. Research actually shows that children who grow up in drug-exposed homes are more likely to struggle with anxiety, depression, and even repeat the cycles of substance abuse themselves. It's not just about what's happening in the moment. It's about rewriting the script for generations to come in the future. So again, we're going to come back to these in more detail. But moving on to the second one, sexual exposure, childhood on fast forward. And I say that because children should not be exposed to any sexual content. They should not be sexually abused, nothing. But kids today are being exposed to sexualized media earlier than ever before. Music videos and social media trends. TikTok, even the way fashion markets to younger audiences with the crop tops and things like that, Everything in our society pushes them to grow up way too fast. Here's why this matters: developmental mismatch. Their brains are not ready to process intimacy, relationships, sexual content, or body image in healthy ways. Exposure to this too early confuses them. And this is why I say we need to not be exposing our kids to anything sexual. It doesn't matter if it's LGBTQ related or not. This often leads to unrealistic expectations and distorted views of their self-image and their self-worth. Moving on to the normalization of hypersexuality. When kids start believing their value lies in their appearance or sexuality, it robs them of their childhood and their ability to develop authentic confidence and respect for themselves. The long-term effects of that are really that early exposure has been linked to higher rates of risky behavior, unhealthy relationships, and even difficulties with boundaries later in life. The message that our society is sending is be older faster. But what's the cost of that? I feel like we are really stealing years of innocence and replacing them with pressure to perform, conform, and sexualize themselves far too early. And, that is a whole nother conversation that we can have later. But, we really think about the predatory behavior in adults and the fact that when we sexualize children, we normalize or we encourage that sexual behavior, or we expose them to sexual content or allow them to look at that, that creates a very risky situation for predators to target those children. And something I've shared numerous times on my social media, because I'm a huge advocate for protecting our children, is that it has been proven that predators and pedophiles look at the father in the home. They look at if the kid is happy, and they look to take that happiness away. But if they see a really involved father, they're less likely to go and target that child. And that's a really scary thing to think about. And I want to cover that topic of predatory behavior later as we move on. But right now we are just skimming through these topics. And then there's violence. Kids are absorbing it everywhere. Video games, movies, news, social media, fights that go viral, which I feel is really weird because I see so many times at the beginning of school, in the school year, at the end of the school year, kids recording other people fighting. And what was once shocking has kind of become an entertainment source for them. And that's really dangerous because it desensitizes them to that violence. When kids constantly see violence, it becomes a normal thing. They lose that sensitivity to suffering. Violence gets coded as a power dynamic. If being aggressive gets likes, attention, or control, it becomes attractive. Communities then feel that ripple effect. Schools see more fights, families feel more anger, society sees more division, and let's not forget the kids that grew up around the real violence in their homes. Whether it's a domestic abuse situation, yelling, physical harm, all of them are at higher risk for repeating those same patterns as adults. Violence becomes not just something that they see, but something that they live in their daily life. So what ties these topics together? The drugs, the sexual exposure, violence, it's all pointing towards one heartbreaking truth. We're normalizing kids growing up way too fast. Childhood is supposed to be about curiosity, play, safety, discovery, innocence, but I feel that too many children are skipping those years and being thrown into adult realities before they're even ready to understand what those mean. The consequences of that: broken identities, cycles of trauma, and adults who never had the chance to just be kids. Us as parents have that conscious choice to shield, guide, and model healthy behavior for our kids. Communities can speak up about what's being marketed to children and push back against the harmful norms. But I feel like it's very hard in this society to speak up and stand for that. It seems that we are more normalizing that kids should be exposed to things, or that it's just how we are in 2025, versus changing that and pushing back against those norms. Like I said, schools and mentors can create safe places where children feel seen and protected. However, having worked in schools, I've seen a lot of things that are covered up, a lot of things that are pushed under the rug. And I think that that's also contributing to a huge problem in our society. How are we supposed to trust these people who are entrusted with our children during the day when, and I'm not saying every school, I'm not specifically pointing out any specific school because it happens everywhere, but predators, abusers, those people are in our schools. It starts with awareness. It starts with asking the hard questions. What are our kids really watching? Who are they around? What are they hearing? And what are they learning? And are we okay with what they are doing? Are we okay with what they are being exposed to by hearing and watching? Who are our kids around and what are they doing to make our children safe or better? Are we okay with any of that? And if we're not, how do we protect our children? Protecting their childhood is all about putting value into that childhood. We don't get these years back, and neither do our kids. And, when we think about back on our own childhood, we had more outdoor play, more play in general, more unstructured time, less screen time. But now kids are growing up in a completely different environment where they're more stimulated than ever before. The bright screens, fast-moving shows, endless social media content, even if it's for the little kids, which I'm guilty of giving my kids my phone for YouTube. But the reality is that the human brain is not wired to process that much constant stimulation, especially when it's still developing. So having worked in schools, I've heard a lot of the time, teachers and staff and things like that, they'll always complain that kids are so overstimulated, they're so hyper, they're having behavior, blah, 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 blah. But, why? Why are children having more behavior? I'm going to dive into that, and I've done my research. However, this is also what I truly believe because, as I said before, I've worked in many different schools and I see a constant pattern. It's a continuous pattern, and there's a constant theme that I've noticed. And I notice, it's normal now. It wasn't normal back then, but it's really normal now. Teachers are complaining about kids having too much energy. Okay. I'm going to get some hate for this. I can already feel it, but that's fine. I don't feel that public school or private school sets kids up in a way where they are 100% successful and ready for life. I know. I'm probably going to get some eye rolls, but stick with me. We are stimulating them at school with the bright colors on the walls and all the hanging plants and all the decor and all the stickers and all the things on the walls, the Scentsy pots and the plugins. And, we're giving them red dyes and all of these things during school. And so what happens? Kids get overstimulated. They get fed crap food. And if you want me to be really honest, it's shit food. And it shows up as irritability, trouble focusing, big meltdowns, and difficulty regulating those emotions. But also, when they don't have school staff who are 100% regulated, which I don't expect anybody to be 100% regulated, that's not what I'm saying. But we live in a society where school staff are constantly so concerned about kids having too much energy or not fitting into the stereotypical normal behavior. What do we do as a suggestion? We give them a snack. And often those snacks are full of dyes, toxins, and just junk food. Or what do? We put them on medication because we think, and we're brainwashed to think that putting kids on these amphetamines, ADHD medication, anxiety medication, depression medication, all of these things, putting them on medication at 5 years old when they're going to preschool or kindergarten, whatever, is going to solve their problem. But newsflash, it doesn't. Because when you put children on those medications so early, number one, their brains are still developing. Number two, they create a dependency. They develop a dependency. Sorry, I misspoke. They develop a dependency on those medications. And what do you have to do? You have to increase the dosage and increase the dosage and increase the dosage, or we have to jump from medication to medication. And doctors get incentives for doing that. And that should not be tolerated or accepted at all, but it is. What's the end result? We create addicts. Addictions to foods that are unhealthy, addictions to screens, addictions to medications, addictions to all of these unhealthy things. And then we wonder why our kids are so fucked up. Excuse my language, but I'm just being very transparent here. We don't connect enough behavior to food. We don't connect enough behavior to screens and what they're being exposed to. We don't connect enough behavior to the systems approach. And if you're not familiar with the systems approach, we look at the system as a whole. Okay? So when we think about kids, the kids who come to school who have behavior, we don't connect enough of that behavior to their home life, what they're being exposed to at home, what they're being fed at home, what they're being, watching at home on the screens. And although we can't control that at the school setting or outside of their home, we don't connect enough of that to what's going on. First, kids' diets today are loaded with processed foods, artificial dyes, and added sugars. Whether it's a parent or a school staff member, we are handing our kids neon-colored snacks, fast food, bringing cupcakes for birthday parties every other week, sodas, energy drinks, whatever. And then we wonder why they can't sit still or regulate their own mood. Studies have shown that certain food dyes can actually contribute to hyperactivity in children. Too much sugar can spike their blood sugar, leading to a crash that looks a lot like defiance or bad behavior. And guess what? From working in the schools, I see that all the time. I watched numerous times school staff hand kids these, sour Skittles or Takis or Doritos or whatever. And then 2 hours later, those kids are defiant, overstimulated, having, quote, bad behavior. And the staff member is like, what's happening? I don't know what's happening. Well, if we would look at the dyes, if we were look at what we feed them, give them an apple or an orange instead of Doritos or sour Skittles or whatever, we would probably solve a lot of problems. When children are not getting a balanced nutritional diet, things like protein or healthy fats, vitamins, minerals, their brains literally don't have the fuel to function calmly or efficiently. And often we mistake their misbehavior instead of misnourishment. But it's not just food or the screens, it's also the culture that kids are growing up in. Children are under more pressure than ever before. Academic demands are higher, extracurriculars are nonstop. You see the moms and the dads who take their children to cheerleading competitions every weekend, or they're rushing around going to baseball leagues every weekend and every week during the summer, whatever. But honestly, I will not be that mom because I don't want downtime and relaxation and recharging our batteries to feel like a rare occurrence. I don't want my children to think that families being busier than ever, parents being more stressed, and kids absorbing all of that energy to be considered normal. I don't want overstimulation to be the new norm. Think about it. If adults are feeling overwhelmed, overstimulated, anxious, or burned out, how do we expect our kids who don't even have the tools to cope with that? How do we expect them to stay regulated when we can't even stay regulated? A lot of what we are labeling as behavior is just really kids showing us who they are when they are stressed, and that is the only way they know how to cope. Because that's one of the biggest complaints that I have with schools and parenting and things like that is we expect our children to act perfectly. Maybe not perfectly, I take that back. We expect our children to sit still and listen the first time. We expect them to do what they're told right now. But guess what? Us as adults, we can't even do that. We can't stay regulated. We lose our cool at the first sight of our children not doing what they're told the first time. But then we put them in front of a screen for hours and hours upon end, feeding them Doritos and McDonald's, which, by the way, is not real food. And then we wonder why they're overstimulated or not listening. Because that burnout, that defiance, that bad behavior is actually just them coming down off of being exposed to too many things at once, or they're coming off of having too much sugar or eating too much fake food or drinking too much unhealthy, juice, pop, whatever. But again, then we turn around and we get frustrated with them when we are the adults giving them that. We are the adults handing the kids Doritos. We are the moms getting our kids McDonald's on the way home. And I'm not saying that's bad all the time. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying if it's a regular basis thing, right? I personally don't feed my kids McDonald's, but I would go to Burger King. That's fine. I'm not judging parenting. What I'm doing is I'm stating a fact that a lot of behavior is labeled as behavior rather than looking at the fact that maybe they need more nutrition, maybe they're needing more protein, maybe they're needing a nap, maybe they're needing more water, maybe they're needing emotional regulation and they need an adult to regulate their emotions so that the child can regulate their emotions. At the end of the day, children and their behavior is communication. It's not them being bad children. It's their way of saying that something feels off inside, whether it's the food that they're given, the media they're exposed to, or stress. Our job as adults in their lives is to look beneath the behavior and ask what's really going on. And I don't feel like enough adults do that. And I'm saying that goes from anywhere from parents to schools to whoever. But if we can shift the environment, what they eat, what they consume, how much pressure they're under, we will see a shift in their behavior as well. So when we talk about behavior being communication, our children are speaking to us all the time, but often it's not with their words. It's actions, moods, meltdowns, silence, and even their energy levels to tell us something important. And again, you guys, we live in a society where the first response for us as adults to challenging behavior is often punishment, or even worse, labeling the child as bad, difficult, or broken. But what if instead of asking what's wrong with this kid, what's wrong with this student, what's wrong with my child, we ask, what is this child trying to tell me? And today, that's part of something that we are going to explore. Children don't always have the vocabulary, emotional regulation, or brain development to express what's going on inside, especially if we think about, like we talked about, the food, the medications, the system, the environment, tantrums, backtalk, shutting down, or acting out. These are signals, not just problems. For example, a toddler throws food at dinner. The parents might immediately think it's defiance, but often that's communication. I'm overstimulated. I don't like the texture, or even I want connection with you. Behavior is the tip of the iceberg. Underneath that are emotions, unmet needs, and stressors. When we decode behavior, we don't excuse it. We understand it so that we can guide it to navigate our own emotions and regulation as adults, so that we can also understand and help that child regulate it as them being a child. So why does behavior as communication matter? Brain development. The prefrontal cortex, that's the part of the brain that's responsible for impulse control and reasoning, doesn't fully develop until the mid-20s. So kids literally don't have the wiring yet. Stress and nervous system. Kids' bodies react to stress with fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Just like us as adults, we've talked about that system before. Behavior is the outward sign of what's happening internally on the inside. And I feel like we're a culture of quick fixes. Society often labels children quickly as ADHD, ODD, problem child, which I feel ADHD and ODD are way overdiagnosed. But many times it's a call for connection, not correction. An example I thought about, a child in class constantly blurts out. Instead of punishment, the teacher takes the time to learn that he's very anxious about being forgotten. So his behavior was communicating fear of invisibility, not because he's ADHD or ODD. And I think that's something that schools are very quick to label. And I think that's part of our problem as a society, is we are so focused on what children are not doing correctly in the eyes of what we consider normal. And instead of focusing on connection and building that regulation, building that toolbox, filling that child's toolbox that we've numerous times talked about, we try to correct the child, or we label them as a problem child. And practical tools for parents, caregivers, teachers, which I wish more teachers would do. I would like to say that I trust public school, but I don't. That's something I'm very vocal about. I have worked in schools. I have seen behind the scenes. I've worked in daycares. I've seen what happens behind the scenes, and it makes me very nervous. But, here's some tools that can help. Is the first one, pause before reacting. I think that this is something as society we skip over. What is my child trying to say through this? What is this child trying to tell me? Look for the unmet needs: hunger, tiredness, overstimulation, disconnection, which is so much more common than what we think because we live in a society of technology and go, go, go culture. Kids often act out when they feel lack of safety or routine. Kids crave stability, they crave routine. Name it to tame it. Help kids label their emotions. Hey, I see you're really frustrated right now, instead of stop whining. Oh my God, shut up. Offer connection over correction. Sometimes a hug, a high five, a fist bump, a calm presence, or a validation is more effective than a consequence or a punishment. And I don't like the word punishment in general. I think consequences. I think it's important to teach children, hey, this is your consequence. It's not going to be a punishment. Well, it might feel like a punishment, but this is your consequence to your decision. It's a consequence to your action. Also, modeling that emotional regulation. Children borrow from our calmness. If we escalate, they escalate. They feed off of our energy. And something that I think is really sad is a lot of students can tell when a teacher doesn't like them. And that's something that I've witnessed with students, with my own child. And I'm a huge advocate for standing up for your child. Do what's best. If the school is wrong, if the education system is wrong, hold them accountable, because often they're not held accountable or they try to cover things. And that doesn't go for just schools. That goes for a lot of different places and agencies. So for an example, think about it. Your teen slams a door. Instead of immediately grounding the teenager, a parent might say, hey, I see you're upset. I want to understand what's going on. So when you're ready, let me know. This approach communicates safety. I don't want my children to ever feel like they can't come to me for something. You know what? You slipped up and did something. Come talk to me about it. Let's work through it together. There may be a consequence, but I want them to know that I'm their safe person. If we are always viewing behavior as defiance or disrespect, we risk damaging that trust. Children may learn my feelings don't matter, or I'm not safe to express myself, or I'm only loved when I'm perfect. And this can carry into adulthood as emotional repression, anxiety, or difficulty with relationships. Society pays the price too. Schools full of kids who are punished instead of supported. Kids that have behavior plans and IEPs because instead of connecting with them, we want to correct them. Adults who never learned how to regulate their emotions, generational cycles of disconnection. All of that is part of the problem. And sometimes a child's behavior triggers us because our own unhealed wounds or stress are still there. Example, a parent who was never allowed to cry may feel very uncomfortable with a child's tears, interpreting them as weakness or manipulation. Part of decoding the child's behavior is also decoding our reactions to that behavior. So I have a reflection question for some parents. When my child acts out, do I respond to the child in front of me or to the child that I once was? Behavior is communication, always. When kids act out, shut down, or explode, they're telling us something about their own inner world. Our role as adults is not to silence that behavior, but to listen to it, decode it, guide them towards healthier ways of expressing themselves. Imagine if every child grew up feeling that their voice mattered, even when they couldn't put it into words. How much less issues we would have. This is the gift that we can give our children when we choose to see behavior not as the enemy, but as a language waiting to be understood. So moving on, we've talked about school systems a little bit and school staff and how they handle things. And honestly, this part of the podcast episode is probably going to ruffle some feathers, but that's okay. That's what this podcast is about. It's not meant to make you feel comfortable. It's to challenge your views. So this topic touches almost every family in one way or another. For generations, and I'm coming from as a child of teachers, okay? Both my parents were teachers. Public education has been considered the backbone of opportunity in America. It's where kids learn, grow, prepare for life. But lately, many parents, teachers, and even students themselves are asking, what is wrong with public schools now? Is it the system, curriculum, culture, or something deeper? I want to break this down a little bit. This is my opinion. First, the system is overloaded. Public schools are designed to serve everyone, but that also means overcrowded classrooms, underpaid teachers, and kids slipping through the cracks. Talk about student to teacher ratios. The rise in special needs and behavior challenges, again, going back to behavior, without proper resources, which also leads to teacher burnout. It seems to be harder for teachers to make that connection with students when the classroom sizes are bigger. I remember a time when a teacher I knew every student personally. Now we have 24, 25 kids in a classroom, and individualized attention feels almost impossible. The second thing, teaching to the test. Standardized testing, I think it's crap. This dominates classrooms and schools. Schools are pressured to meet state scores, which often means memorization is more important than critical thinking. And I think that leads to problems later on when kids are grown up and, it's hard to have those critical thinking skills when that's not being pushed in the classrooms because kids are learning how to pass tests, but not to problem solve in real life scenarios. Example, a lack of financial literacy, communication skills, and creativity in curriculum. The most important thing I think right now in 2025, we have a mental health crisis in the schools. Anxiety, depression, ADHD, ODD, behavior struggles, those are skyrocketing in children. Schools are not equipped to handle this, nor do I think that they have the staffing to do so. However, this goes back to my point that we need to be looking at what these kids are eating. We need to be having healthier options. We need to be regulating better. We need to be communicating better. We need to do all of these things to make changes, because if we don't, then it's not going to get any better. We've built a system where kids are expected to perform like machines while ignoring the human behind the grades. We are teaching them to follow the system without asking questions. We are forcing them to either be completely secluded in classrooms because of behavior or forcing them to be in situations that they're not ready for. Education has become so political. Parents, boards, and states argue over what should be taught, which leaves kids caught in the middle of a fight that they shouldn't even be in. And, while we're on this topic, why are reading, math, and science more important than teaching emotional regulation, teaching communication? Lack of consistent focus on life skills, trade skills, and adaptable learning also contributes to the issue in our society. There's an agenda. It's a brainwashing technique. I know that sounds crazy. I know people probably don't agree with that, but I didn't learn how to write in a checkbook when I was in school. I sat in my seat and learned how to do an algebra equation, which never was relevant after I graduated high school. I feel like we would be a lot more successful if we were to teach kids skills that they can apply later on. And when we think about it, kids are spending 7+ hours sitting indoors with little movement, having to follow these, quote, standards of focusing and sitting still when kids are not made to sit still. And school lunches often don't support brain health at all. Talk about food quality, junk food in cafeterias, and cutting recess for academics. What does that lead to? If kids can't move and eat well, how do we expect them to learn? How do we expect kids to be regulated, healthy, calm, if they are not allowed to go outside of that, expectation or standard for what society is considered as normal? I feel like this is why homeschooling, online schools, charter schools, and private education rates are growing. And the fact that parents are scrambling for alternatives tells us that the public school system is failing and it's not meeting the needs of students. I'm not saying that the public schools are broken because of the teachers not caring, although I think some teachers don't give a shit. They're broken because the system, it's outdated, it's overworked, and it's underfunded. And we are not teaching kids anything. At the end of the day, when they're graduated, They're not going to use algebra unless they're doing some math thing or whatever. This is not just what's wrong with public schools. It's whether or not we as a society are going to and willing to build something better, something that sets our children up for success later on in life, and not just teaching them how to conform to the government's standards or expectations. And no, I'm not dogging on everything in our society. I'm just simply saying that I think sometimes, more so right now, we are robbing children of their childhood and things that have become almost normalized in our culture, and most notably right now, I'm discussing the emotional regulation, the curriculum that schools are teaching, the way schools are educating our children, and the way that it's so structured to where we are outcasting the children that are different or, quote, difficult. We are so focused on correcting that instead of connecting with it that we almost forget that we don't have to fit into a box. Children don't have to fit into a box. That's what we are told, but that's not what's normal. And I think that that's important to really recognize that, kids are growing up in a world where exposure to violence is constant, exposure to sexuality is constant, exposure to dysregulation and emotional instability are normalized. And the hardest part of this entire conversation is admitting that we as a society are failing them. Going back to the beginning and kind of circling back to that beginning conversation, kids today are growing up in a world where that exposure to the drugs and the violence and the sexuality is everywhere. And it's not just fictional, it's real life violence, real life sexuality, real life drug use, from school shootings to neighborhood crime to wars plastered on the evening news to pornography. Children are constantly absorbing messages that aggression, domination, manipulation, and destruction are normal parts of life. Even dysregulation can be added into that. We as a society have desensitized children. They think that a fist fight in the hallway is normal. It barely shocks anyone anymore. A graphic sexual video online becomes entertainment, but that desensitizing is trauma that rewires the brain, makes kids anxious, reactive, unable to process emotions, dysregulated, hypersexual, and engaging in risky behavior. Let's talk about drugs. We talked about that in the beginning. For so many young people, drugs are no longer some far off problem. They're accessible, they're glamorized. Some parents actively use drugs in front of their children. We live in a culture where popping a pill, vaping, and getting high isn't seen as a dangerous thing. It's seen as normal. Kids are self-medicating with, anything from Adderall to vaping, because when they're stressed, lonely, depressed, or simply searching for a belonging, instead of teaching them to cope, instead of teaching them to address the root causes of what they feel, society looks away. Or worse, they profit off it. We don't teach children to assess what they're feeling and why they're feeling it. We give them pills. We give them a screen. We send them off to do whatever. And when corporations, the truth is, when corporations make money off substances, commercials, social media, when pharmacies hand out prescriptions like candy, when communities ignore the warning signs, kids are left to figure it out themselves, and they're not ready for that. They're paying the price for our failure as a society. And then there's sex. Our culture is obsessed with sex, pornography. Kids can't scroll on TikTok, watch a movie, or even sit through a music video without being bombarded with sexual imagery. What does this do to them? It strips children of their innocence. Even, and I'm probably going to piss people off, but I'm just saying, even the LGBTQ community pushing the agenda, pushing drag queens in schools, pushing pride parades, putting children in that exposure creates a distortion of their understanding of relationships, love, self-worth, and reality. Young boys learn to view women as objects. They're objective. Young girls are taught that their value comes from their looks and their sexuality. And then when kids are exposed to that too early, they don't have the emotional maturity to process what they're seeing. Instead, it creates confusion, shame, and often exploitation. So, why are we failing them? Because we're not protecting them, that's for sure. We shrug it off and say things like, well, that's just the world that we live in now. It's 2025. We hand kids iPads at dinner time without filters, phones, without limits, and then we wonder why they're anxious, depressed, or angry. We turn a blind eye to addressing these issues because it means looking at ourselves, looking at the culture that we've created, at the industries that we support, at the silence that we've allowed. We fail our kids when we don't step in, when we prioritize profits over protection, when we let media raise them, when we hand them to a world that's saturated with pedophilia, drugs, violence, and hypersexualization, but we offer them no tools to put in that toolbox to navigate that. It doesn't have to stay this way. We can do better. We can demand better. It starts with us, parents, teachers, mentors, communities, drawing the lines in the sand, protecting childhood, talking openly with kids instead of shaming them, giving them healthy outlets to look for, modeling what respect, love, and resilience looks like. Because children shouldn't have to heal from their childhood. Childhood should be a time of growth, discovery, safety, and joy. And if we want that for them, we have to start fighting for them and protecting them, not against each other, but against the systems and the cultural patterns that are stealing that away. This isn't just about kids these days. This is about the future of our society, because if we fail them now, think about it. We fail generations to come. So my question remains, when are we ready to stop failing them? Are we ready as a society to step up and protect what's most precious to our futures and our lives? Part of it starts with really educating ourselves and doing the research on what's healthy versus not healthy. And I'm not just talking about behaviors or, regulating. I'm talking about the so-called crunchy mom lifestyle and why healing our children from the inside out might actually be one of the most important things that we can do as parents. And it's not talked about a lot, Western medicine is seen as normal, while functional medicine, holistic medicine, all of that is seen as taboo. Now, I know the label crunchy mom usually gets thrown around in a dismissive way. It brings up images of homemade granola, essential oils, baby carriers, and parents who reject mainstream parenting choices. But behind the stereotype, there's actually something really powerful in that. An approach that questions whether the way our society is raising kids is truly serving their long-term health. So what does healing from the inside out mean? Healing from the inside out is about looking deeper than the symptoms. Instead of asking, how do I stop my child from acting out? We ask, what is happening in their body at the cellular level, their mind, their environment that might be causing this behavior? Because our kids' brains and their bodies are developing at lightning speed. Every bite of food, every hour of screen time, every stressful situation, every chemical they're exposed to, it all shapes the architecture of their brain. Healing from the inside out means focusing on nutrition, emotional safety, play, connection, and giving their developing nervous system what they need instead of constantly trying to manage surface level issues. Again, putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. Here's the thing. This is where it kind of gets controversial. Medication is the new norm. I'm not saying I don't agree with medication. I don't agree with putting kids on it to do a quick fix of behavior. In our society today, putting kids on medications for behavior, focus, or mood has become the new normal. We see the numbers rising, more ADHD diagnoses, more ODD, more kids prescribed antidepressants or amphetamines to calm them down. And while medication can sometimes be necessary, it may be worth asking, have we gotten too comfortable with using pills as the first solution instead of the last? I can't tell you how many parents I've heard say, well, my kid is acting out at school and my kid is acting out at home. I need a medication. The truth is, many of these medications can alter their brain chemistry in ways that we don't fully understand. Children's brains are not finished developing until their mid-20s. So introducing those powerful chemical interventions really early, we risk altering their neural pathways that might otherwise have matured naturally with the right support. That's where the behavior regulation, emotional regulation, understanding, healthy food and nutrition, all of that comes into play. Let's zoom out for a second. Why are kids struggling so much in the first place? Nutrition, we've talked about that. Highly processed foods, artificial dyes, sugar spikes wreak havoc on brain health, energy, and mood. Screens and overstimulation. I am guilty of this with my children. Do not think that I'm not. Kids are spending less time in nature and more time with blue light, dopamine-driven content, and constant noise. That is that overstimulation. Stress and family dynamics. Divorce, financial pressure, parents who are overstimulated themselves, all create environments where children's nervous systems are under chronic stress. And then we have societal pressure. Schools, right? They often expect children to sit still, memorize, and perform. Instead of honoring different learning styles and developmental stages, they have to fit into that box. When you combine all of this, it's a full circle. No wonder but so many kids are struggling to cope. The problem isn't the kids, it's the environment that we've created for them. Think of your child's brain like a garden. If you water it, give it sunlight, protect them from toxins, and nurture it with good soil, it thrives. But if you ignore the soil, pour chemicals on it, and try to fix the problems with quick solutions, the garden struggles. Healthy brains and development depend on omega-3s, vitamins, minerals from real food, movement and play that builds coordination and focus, strong attachment and emotional regulation from the parents, sleep, rest, and time from overstimulation. We rely way too heavily on that medication, which leads us to skipping the foundational pieces. And in the long run, that can not only affect the brain health, but also the confidence, creativity, and emotional resilience that children are supposed to have. They're not supposed to fit into that box. It's okay to let them be different. Here's the thing, being a crunchy mom shouldn't be taboo. It's not about being perfect or rejecting everything modern. It's about asking the hard questions, doing the research, educating yourself, and refusing to normalize a culture where medicating kids is easier than changing their diet, lifestyle, or environment. It's about being brave enough to stand up and say, hey, maybe our society is upside down. Maybe we have it backwards. Maybe healing our children from the inside out at the cellular level, remember? We're not just putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. That's what medications do. Heal it with detoxes, cleanses, supplements that take away the surface level things and heal from the inside out. That's the most loving thing that we can do for our children. So whether you wear the crunchy mom label proudly, or you've never even resonated with it, or you think it's completely stupid, I invite you to rethink what's normal. Our kids don't need more quick fixes. They need us to slow down, to heal their insides, to protect their developing brains, and nurture them into whole, resilient humans. Because when we heal our children from the inside out, we're not just raising healthier kids, we're building a healthier future for everyone. And that's where the functional medicine comes in. And we will get to this in more depth later on with my guests that are coming on the podcast. We've all heard the phrase, take this pill and you'll feel better. But the truth is, feeling better and actually being better are not the same thing. We look for quick fixes, but we are going to explore the benefits of functional medicine, not in a ton of detail today, but just kind of skim over what it is and how it works to heal at the cellular level compared to conventional Western medicine, which often focuses on managing or masking those symptoms. Now, before I get started on this part, let's be clear, Western medicine has incredible strengths. I'm not dissing on that. If you break a bone, need surgery, or facing a life-threatening infection, modern medicine saves lives every single day. But when it comes to the chronic conditions, things like autoimmune disorders, gut issues, hormonal imbalances, fatigue, depression, anxiety, the conventional model often gives us Band-Aids. Again, Band-Aids on bullet wounds. Medications that silence symptoms without addressing the root cause. Think about it for a second. Oh, you have acid reflux? Here's an acid blocker. Joint pain? Here's a painkiller. Anxiety? Take this antidepressant or this anti-anxiety pill. These approaches do not ask why the body is inflamed, stressed, or out of balance in the first place. It just gives that masking, the Band-Aid, right? Functional medicine flips the script. Instead of asking what drugs matches the disease, it asks, why is this happening in the first place? And look, I used to be really skeptical of functional medicine. I thought it was really wacky and weird, but it's something that I swear by. And I'm watching my children heal, and I just think it's incredible. So the root cause of healing, that's what this looks at. Not the surface level. Practitioners in functional medicine look at nutrition, micronutrient deficiencies, gut health, microbiome, inflammation, immune dysregulation, toxins, stress, parasites, lifestyle factors. Instead of covering up the symptoms, functional medicine digs really deep into restoring that balance at the cellular level, because that's where the true healing happens, inside your cells, where your energy is made, where detoxification occurs, where your DNA is expressed. For example, someone with chronic fatigue, Western medicine might prescribe a stimulant or an antidepressant to boost their energy. But functional medicine asks, are the mitochondria, your cell's powerhouses, under stress? Is there chronic inflammation draining your energy? Are there nutrient deficiencies like B12, magnesium that fuel cellular repair? How is sleep, stress, or hidden infections impacting the body's energy system? By identifying and correcting these root imbalances, you don't just cover up fatigue, you rebuild your energy from the inside out. There's a difference between that short-term relief and the long-term restoration. It's not about choosing one over the other. We need both. Western medicine is unmatched in emergencies, but for chronic illnesses, functional medicine offers the tools to rebuild the health, not just manage the disease. Imagine combining both approaches, using medication when truly needed, while also addressing nutrition, gut health, sleep, emotional well-being, and environmental triggers, because that's where the real transformation lies. For example, I healed my children's gut, one of my children's gut, with parasite and heavy metal detoxes. And when that child was seen by a functional medicine doctor, those toxins were already getting cleared out of her system. So when we started addressing the real issues, we found how to build and manage and heal everything from the cellular level all the way up. Because again, masking pain is temporary, but restoring balance is freedom. So here's a question I'm going to leave you with today. Are you settling for managing your symptoms? Or are you ready to dig deeper to heal your body at its core, at the cellular level, where lasting changes happen? Because imagine for a second, if we healed our children, how much less behavior we would have, how much less gut health issues we would have, how much less anger and emotional instability we would have. All of this connects and all of this is related. So this was a lot of information to talk about today. I'm going to break this down into some more episodes later on, and we're going to talk more in depth about all of these different topics. So thank you for tuning in today. If this conversation sparks something in you, share this episode with a friend who's on their healing journey, share it with a crunchy mom, share it with a teacher, share it with whoever. Until next time, keep asking the deeper questions, keep doing your research, keep seeking true wellness, keep asking for answers, because once we educate ourselves, and not just on the outside, once we really dig deep and educate ourselves, that's where it truly begins transformation. So until next time, I will see you later.